Now is my Sunday night panel. Cristela Alonso is a comedian and actor. Xochitl Hinojosa is a Democratic strategist. And Michael Steele is an MSNBC political analyst, former RNC chairman, and former Maryland lieutenant governor. It's great to have all three of you with us. Michael, I know you are a student of history, and to paraphrase the words of Senator Howard Baker Jr., what did the Secret Service know? When did they know it? A lot of people in Washington have to be asking themselves that. How disturbed are you by these allegations raised by the January 6th committee?
I'm very disturbed by it, and I think a lot of people, if they aren't, they should be. The fact that these allegations are being raised the way they have, the fact that seemingly everybody kind of is like slow rolling this a little bit. It's not really seems to be as exercised by it. I find it to be a little bit problematic. There were a number of us around that time who said it seemed a little bit odd. I mean, particularly I can attest to this as a native Washingtonian who knows what, when a large crowd comes to D.C., what happens in this town between police, D.C. police, Capitol Hill police, Secret Service, FBI, all of the law enforcement agencies. And it just felt different. The fact that you watched them storm the way they did, the lack of resistance to that. You heard people say at the time, if that were, in fact, Black Lives Matter protesters, there would have been a lot more violence and a lot more bodies on the ground. And not violence by the protesters, but violence by the police intercepting them. So I think now asking these questions is appropriate and important. And the fact that we have to ask them or need to ask them, I think is very chilling.
Yeah, Xochitl, I'm old enough to remember following the intelligence failures of 9/11, what this country did in terms of how we overhauled our intelligence community and looked at the failures. And, if you had to pick one of, between negligence, ignorance, or complicity, what do you think is behind the so-called intelligence failure that allowed for the chaos of the Capitol insurrection?
Well, I think there's a lot that we still don't know. And just this last week, there was video that was made public from Speaker Nancy Pelosi begging the administration and begging those in office to send the National Guard and to send help, and basically asking, what would you do if this were the White House? What would you do if this were any other government entity? And the Speaker of the House should not be asking that question. We should be having law enforcement and our members of Congress and the Speaker of the House and our majority leader and the rest of our federal government should have protections in place when they're trying to execute their jobs. One interesting thing that I don't think has been mentioned yet is that the Department of Justice has an inspector general, and they are tasked with investigating this type of thing. And they announced an investigation last year. It has not wrapped. And they're looking into the fact what happened leading up to it and the preparations of it. And so I think that a lot of people will be watching for that to see exactly what the IG finds and what exactly happened so that the American people have answers.
Cristela, for the last couple of years, Republicans, radio cranks, and Fox hosts, they have been raving about the deep state. And yet here we are with very disturbing evidence of the FBI and Secret Service agents having sympathies for the January 6th insurrectionists. And so far, not a peep from the right wing about this so-called deep state. What do you make of that?
Well, I think I can sum it up like this. They're hypocrites. Doesn't help their cause. Why would they say anything, right? I mean, it's not going to help get votes. I will say that, when I heard that people were comparing it to the Black Lives Matter movement, Black Lives Matter was about talking about the injustice, trying to speak about how Black lives actually mattered. In this situation, the riot, which, by the way, happened on my birthday, January 6th, was to stop democracy from happening. And that is very different from actually acknowledging that people are struggling and people need equality. So I think that's really frustrating. But look, we're seeing the hypocrisy everywhere, right? Prime example, Herschel Walker in Georgia. What they say they stand for isn't what they stand for. What they want are votes. And that's all it is. So it's the party of popularity. They'll do and say anything they want to become popular. They don't mean anything that they say, because that's a prime example. It's like, look, what suits us best? That's what we want right now.
Michael, how do you wrap your head around certain folks with conservative leanings at the FBI and at the Secret Service And I use that kind of reluctantly because I think it's much more than just simply conservative leanings. These are people who are entrusted with ensuring the people who run our government, if you're looking at the Secret Service and also other investigations, and the FBI, which is the premier law enforcement agency, apparently admiring those who tried to violently overthrow American democracy. I mean, the severity of that revelation, I don't think it has landed on most Americans just yet.
I'd agree with that. I don't think it has. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Republicans have allowed conservatism as it grew up inside the Republican Party over 160 years to become this sort of bastardized right-wing, ideologically intolerant mindset. It's certainly not what the founding of the party was about. So you don't have folks reiterating and reaffirming those principles. So, for example, wanting smaller government, less government intrusion in the lives of everyday ordinary Americans, a fairer tax system, et cetera, has nothing to do with overthrowing the government. It's not the same thing. Right. It has nothing to do with repressing the vote. Republicans right now forget that we were working hand in hand with the civil rights agenda of the late 50s and the early 60s to get voting rights and so forth and civil rights in place. And now we've spat on them. We crap all over them. And people take that as conservative. So as a conservative, I'm offended by that. But I get it, and I understand that. And I really look around at the folks inside the party, and I go, why are you allowing this to happen? And so when you see this element growing up inside of our military, inside of our police forces, there's no leadership there to redirect that energy and to refocus that this is about your public service, not about your political agenda. And absent that, we're now getting these reports, and I dare say, Ayman, there will be more to come, and there's more that's going to surprise and disappoint us in the weeks and months ahead.
Sochi, really quickly, what should the Biden administration be doing right now? I mean, this is a pretty serious moment. Should they be ringing the alarm bell? Should they be leading more, if you will, on this issue?
Well, when it comes to the handling of how law enforcement handled January 6th, I think they're leaving that up to the Department of Justice, which I think that they should. I think the president has been very careful in getting involved in any sort of investigations and leaving that to Attorney General Garland and to aggressively go after those who are involved in January 6th. And so I think that should continue. What I think that the president has done and will continue to do is that he will raise awareness around sort of what's at stake in our democracy. And I think you'll continue to see him do that ahead of our election.
All right, panel, stick around. We've got a lot more to discuss later in the hour. After the break, I'll be joined live by Adrian Fontes, the Arizona Secretary of State candidate who's running against a dangerous promoter of the big